You know, there's not really that much to say about a franchise that essentially originated as a military-themed answer to Barbie. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. It was basically a military-themed answer to Barbie, and they suddenly had to change their strategy when Vietnam happened, so basically that's where Cobra Commander came from. They basically made up a villain because they couldn't use the actual military anymore because it was no longer popular. And so, yeah, that's how we end up with all this whole mythos. The only behind-the-scenes stuff regarding this film that I know about is that it was pretty much initially supposed to come out last summer. And I mean, they already had the toys coming out, they were already marketing it like crazy, but then the studio just suddenly said, you know what this needs? More Channing Tatum. And so they basically had to reshoot a bunch of stuff and shoot more scenes with Channing Tatum, but looking at this film, it wasn't really worth the delay. See, the story of this film, it's a bit of a mess. Mostly because, for the most part, you're getting told one story at the beginning, but it takes a long time to get to the inciting incident when that huge attack decimates the entire unit, leaving those 3 survivors. And then after that, it's almost like we're being told 2 or 3 different stories at once. You've got the Joes trying to get back to America and figure out what's going on. You've got Snake Eyes trying to kidnap Storm Shadow. And you've got the Cobra people busting Cobra Commander out of prison. It was a mess, especially with some of the weird editing choices. I mean, there were times where I even went to like Michael Bay Transformers 3 territory where you'd have like the black screen over stuff, you'd hear only the audio. I mean, I was almost thinking like, is something wrong with the projector? But then it got even worse when they tried to introduce the whole Storm Shadow stuff and all of his backstory. It's an example of the clumsiest way you can deliver exposition. I mean, really, really clumsy. But yeah, the story was a mess, the editing choices made it worse, and ultimately things just get downright goofy during the 3rd act. Because I mean, you've got too many things that are just like, oh, stakes are increasing, and then finally you're just like, okay. And it's literally just a case of the film was like, yeah, look, it's G.I. Joe. We know you're not going to take it seriously. We're just doing this so that we can sell a bunch of toys, because that's literally what some of the stuff looked like. It's just like, hey, see this vehicle? Buy it as a toy. They may as well have just placed, hey, remember this vehicle? You can buy it now for 30 bucks from Toys R Us. The only thing I can really give the film credit for is the action sequences, because the action sequences are pretty interesting to watch, especially the ones where there's a lot of the martial arts stuff and more of the hand-to-hand combat stuff. The gunplay was fairly impressive, but it was still just kind of a case of, yeah, it's people shooting people. Basically stuff you would see in your typical Call of Duty fan film. It was almost as if they thought up all of these different action sequences, and then right as they were about to get ready to start shooting, they realized they forgot to put a story to the whole thing, and so they figured, well, crap, what do we do? And the acting in this film is pretty decent. It's just more of a case of that, you can tell they're kind of doing their best, but given the material they were having to work with, not even Bruce Willis could save it. And I mean, at least Bruce Willis was actually in the movie and not like just in it for 20 minutes. He at least actually was in it and did stuff, but you can only watch him do the whole for so long before you start thinking, okay, it's basically a PG-13 version of John McClane. So overall, it's still an entertaining film, but don't go into it expecting Shakespeare, because the story is a mess, the editing choices are really weird, the action sequences are good, but the story itself and just, it doesn't come together really well. I mean, in the 3rd act things get pretty interesting, but then stuff just gets also downright goofy. I mean, you've got some people doing heel face turns, and you've got, basically it's just a bunch of stuff where everything is exposited in a very clunky manner. On the upside, you don't have to have seen the previous movie in order to understand what's going on, because the film does fill you in. It literally gives you a nice recap of what happened in the previous film and what's happened since then, but it's just a case that you're better off waiting until this film comes to the dollar theaters. Don't bother paying for 3D. It doesn't really look like it's worth it. I mean, given how the film looked, it was probably a post-convert, so on my personal scale, I'm giving G.I. Joe Retaliation a 3 out of 5. If you kind of are in the mood for a movie that you just go in, turn your brain off, and watch explosions and fighting, then you'll enjoy it, but that's pretty much all it is. It's like a really high-budget but cult-following action film from the late 80s, early 90s. That's the best way I can describe it. It's as if that they took a script that was written for a film in the 90s and then just gave it today's technology. So that's it for this week's episode of Raw News Reviews. Unless IMDb is lying to me again, next week I'll be reviewing the Evil Dead remake. See ya then.